Welcome to the Real Estate Secrets Podcast for healthcare professionals, hosted by Austin Hare and Nathan Palmer, who together have over 2 decades of real estate knowledge and investing.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today we have a special guest, Dr. David Maloley. And Dr. David Maloley is the owner and coach of Relentless Dentists. Pretty much what they do is help dentists have their best year every year. And so he's been podcasting since 2013, started speaking in 2015, and started coaching 3 years ago. So David, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. And yeah, just wanted to see, how's it going, man?
Great, Austin. It's great to be with you today. It's an honor. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So I'm over here in Orlando, Florida. And what part of the country are you coming at us from?
I'm in Avon, Colorado. So to give reference, it's Eagle County. Beaver Creek, I can literally walk to the gondola at Beaver Creek from my office here. So right in the heart of the Rocky Mountain ski country.
Nice. All right, great, man. Well, cool. Yeah, I'd love to just get to know you more, but more about your story, more about what made you successful. So, I mean, were you always from Colorado, or what part of the country are you from?
No, I grew up, and I think in my heart, I'll always be a Nebraska farm boy. So a small town community called Lexington in Nebraska. That's where I learned my work ethic. And I stayed in Nebraska through undergrad, through dental school. And then it was actually an Army scholarship that took me not only out of Nebraska, but abroad. So that really expanded my horizons. Nebraska is a great place to grow up, but it's a bit of a bubble, people think and act alike in a lot of ways. And so to have the opportunity to live in South Carolina for a residency and then serve 4 years in Europe was a complete mind blow for me. Learned what good beer and good wine and good cheese and all sorts of good things, really to savor the life experience. So it's really a lot of the reason why I decided to move to a resort town, because I feel like people here celebrate life, and my default was just work, and more work. So it's a good check for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny that you were in South Carolina, because I'm from South Carolina. I'm from right there on the border of North and South Carolina, right near Charlotte, in a place called Fort Mill.
Oh, nice. So I did a residency at Fort Jackson, and then I did 2 years as an associate in Huntersville. So not far from where you're talking, right there on Lake
Nice.
Norman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. All right. So you said you're from a farm town. Now, did you actually work on the farm when you were younger?
Yeah, absolutely. My grandparents were immigrants from Lebanon, and they had, believe it or not, 12 kids. So my dad was the seventh son. He had a younger brother. And part of the culture there was that as soon as you could work, probably about my son's age at 10, like you were doing what you could do. And so you learn to drive at a young age, well before 16. And it's just part of the environment there. So yeah, grew up around with cornfields and cattle right there in my backyard.
Wow, man, that is crazy. Okay. So from farming to dentistry.
Yeah, it wasn't a clean cut path. My first career pursuit was actually athletic medicine. I remember being in high school and I was watching an NFL game and I saw these guys run on the field when somebody got hurt, and I was like, that looks like a cool job. So my first pursuit was athletic medicine, and I did that at the University of Nebraska before I made the pivot into dental school.
Wow. And so what caused you to want to pivot?
It's an interesting story. I mean, I think really two fundamental reasons. One, it was like 94, 95. This was a national championship football team. And something in my head said, this is about the pinnacle. And so what's going to happen once I get my degree? Am I going to be the head trainer at some minor league baseball team, riding a bus and being really married to my job? And I think that brings up the second point, is that I knew the dawn till dusk work thing, and it didn't seem like what I wanted from a lifestyle. And I saw these trainers. They were amazing people. They were really connected to the athletes, really were good at building relationships. And I loved all that, but they were there at 5 a.m. and leaving at 9 p.m. And it didn't seem like I could have a family, and the travel that they're doing wasn't the travel that I wanted to be doing. And so I started looking around and exploring other healthcare professions. And it was actually the team dentist of the basketball team that I was working with in '96, who ended up being the director of admissions at the dental school, that I told him I was a little bit frustrated and a little bit confused and disoriented. And he sat me down for an hour and painted a picture for me that sounded really compelling. And in that moment, it was clear to me that that was the next step.
That's great. Okay. So essentially, you didn't want to have that farm lifestyle of just like working 13 hours a day. And then you eventually became a dentist. Now, when you became a dentist, did that translate into like less working hours or like what kind of happened? Like, were you able to meet your expectations or, I mean, what was that process like?
Well, there's been several stages in my career. I mean, the European experience was a really kind of light workload as far as clinical, but I got to travel all over we take a vacation virtually every month. So I really got to explore a lot there. So that was more of a life experience than a professional experience. But where I really got burdened down is I started this practice in 2009, which, as you'll recall, wasn't great timing to start any sort of business. No connections, vicious seasonal trends in the local economy, and so it took all of me. So that was like 3 full-time jobs, making sure that I was showing up for the patients. I had to learn to be a marketer. I had to learn to be an entrepreneur. I had to learn to be a leader, and spinning all those plates is really chaotic. And in the meantime, there was lots of stuff going on at home. Um, Within a year of starting the practice, we had our child. There were medical events associated with that. And so it was a really chaotic and turbulent time financially, as a leader, as I was trying to get my, some traction in the business and get some cash flow, wondering if I made the world's smartest move or the world's dumbest move. So that was really demanding for the first 3 or 4 years until I started having breakthroughs, which was really core to what I coach now.
Man, that is crazy. Yeah, it's like, when you start a business, doesn't matter what it is, you're wearing every single hat, right? Even dentistry,
For
even in
sure.
healthcare, right? Like it's like you
Yeah.
got to do so many things. So, um, you said it took about 3 or 4 years to really kind of get a grip on things.
Yeah. So the backstory really is that my wife Kara, we were living in Huntersville at the time, and as we were getting ready to move here, we found out she was pregnant, and I was like, "Oh my God, another mouth to feed!" Like that's the last thing I need is I'm like bleeding cash, right? And so she helped me start the practice, but about a month before she was due, she started having complications, and she actually had to be medevac from Vail to Denver to save her life and the life of my son. And so that, like, as you can imagine, when you have no money and you're trying to start a business and you have that kind of emotional impact, like just adds, it's like another thing that kind of never goes away because it's shocking. And you start to worry about everything, like, are they healthy? Are they going to stay healthy? And then in 2013, my wife was kind of everywhere. She's really talented. She has a doctorate in organizational leadership. She was the president of the United Way. She was on the local church council. She was helping me. She was working for an organization called Vail Leadership Institute. She was, taking care of my son and picking up from preschool. And she had just happened to be in my office that day, which was kind of a rare thing at that time in the morning. And I numbed up a patient in my neighboring operatory, and he wasn't numb, thankfully. He started to squirm a little bit, and so I gave him some more anesthetic. And I went back to my office because I knew she was there, and I found her face down on her laptop computer. And her right arm and right leg were tucked underneath her. And I mean, I had enough medical training that I knew immediately that she had a stroke. And I said, "Kara, are you okay?" And she just looked up at me with these big scared eyes and she had no words. She just let out a puff of air. So within 3 years, she was medevac twice. Again, she had to be medevac to Denver to save her life. They put 2 stents in her internal carotid artery to restore the blood flow to her brain. And then that night, we almost lost her. So
Wow.
this all just started to be this compounding thing. I was starting to make big moves in the dental practice, and it was really starting to become the premier practice because all of our referrals and marketing was really starting to take hold. But I came back from that event as like a broken man, and it took me a bit to get oriented again. And I just there was a moment shortly thereafter that I just drew a line in the sand. I'm like, I have to show up better than this, and there's got to be an easier way. And so that's when I really started understanding the science and art of high performance, the science and art of building and aligning a team. And with a short amount of time, I went from like this grit, hustle, grind thing to like 11 or 12-day work months, spending lots of time out of the office, lots of time on vacation. We booked quarterly vacations. And so it really became a lifestyle practice just by orienting myself with best practices, not in dentistry, but in the world, aligning with the best thought leaders and really understanding those concepts. So that's when it really took off. And then it became this kind of virtually, it gave me the feeling it was an unstoppable business. And it really felt like that. Like it just got better and better because we were very referral driven, and we were also very team driven. So I could get a lot of that work and worry off my plate through hiring good people, training them, and then delegating appropriately.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So you were kind of forced into the situation where it was sink or swim because you couldn't keep spinning both these plates. I mean, between your wife's health and the dentistry. And so what you said, that's when you transitioned from working all the time, double full time, whatever you want to call it, to 11, 12 hour or 12-day months. So what specifically did you do that helped you do that transition? What were some like breakthroughs or specific things that you can talk about?
I really started to dive into the science. So everything was research based. Like when it came to team stuff, I no longer read a book that looked like a bunch of fluff. And I felt like that's what I was getting into when I was pouring through a lot of the books. Like Jim Collins' books are really excellent because they're based on research and patterns and high performing businesses and what they do right and what they do wrong. But there's a lot of other stuff that now in hindsight, it's just really written to sell a book. And so I would say that the most important thing, and it's really core to my coaching model, is that if the dentist is going to stay a clinician, they have to understand that they are the business. There's I think it's a Jay-Z that says, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. And if we don't start taking care of the leader like this racehorse, then everything downstream from it suffers. So if you're exhausted, there's a huge mental illness epidemic in the industry. Like if we're not taking care of that leader, the personality of that leader permeates the whole organization. So there's really three drivers there as I look at it: clarity, energy, and courage. If we can put that to the front of the line as opposed to leaving that for what's left over, and there's usually nothing left over, then we can start increasing our capacity as a leader, and we have more time for these one-on-one meetings and everything that a great organization has in it. If we don't do that, then the dentist is depleted, and he just tries, or she tries, to grow his business with one more crown, this clinical treadmill that never works out well in the end.
Yeah. So what were some of those first books that you read that were really impactful to helping you create this structure in your life?
Well, I immediately dove into coaching training. And so my first coaching training was with Brendon Burchard, and he breaks down the science of high performance. And I think it's, for achievers who are likely listening to this show, it's important to understand that high performance is achievement. So we're getting the increased profits and the increased time freedom, but it doesn't come at the sacrifice of more stress and less fulfillment, and where you feel like you're trying to be everything and everyone. You're starting to offload some of this work and worry, and you can really focus on the three things that a dentist should be focusing on, or a clinician should be focused on, assuming they're an entrepreneur clinician that has high demands, is that you need to be great at things that require a dental license. You need to be a great CEO. You need to do things that bring you joy and re-energize you. The rest, you have to find something that automates it or where you can delegate it. So it's really the work of Brendon Burchard, and that's where I became a certified high performance coach. High Performance Habits is kind of the book that summarizes that. And then I started studying with John Maxwell, who's considered the world's leading expert on leadership and has written countless best-selling books. Once I started understanding those fundamentals, is how do you take care of the leader, and then how do you take care of the organization, a lot of the profits and the time freedom kind of took care of itself. And that was important to me because I didn't want to be in healthcare chasing a dollar, because that creates an ethical dilemma. Sometimes it clouds your judgment when you need to hit certain benchmarks every day. And so I wanted it to be a trust-based organization. And this allows you to be a trust-driven organization, a mission-driven organization, a values-driven organization, and still not feeling like you're running a nonprofit and that you're not harvesting more pay at the end of the month and not seeing that profit and revenue trend upward as time goes on.
Yeah, I think that's good. I know for me personally, like I read Rich Dad Poor Dad at like a really young age, and then the 4 Hour Work Week.
Yeah.
And there's really great takeaways in both those things, but you're also talking about some books are written to be fluff. Like, the 4-hour work week. I mean, that's just not reality. Like,
Right.
you just can't. It takes, first of all, if it is reality, it takes 80 hours a week to get there for a couple years, and then you get a 4-hour work week. But by that point, the chances are you're the type of person that can get to a 4-hour work week is not the same type of person that's going to be satisfied there, right?
Yeah,
So,
totally.
but the good takeaways were being productive with your time, like really measuring how are you spending your time, and then can you outsource certain things, right? Those
Totally.
are really practical takeaways.
And
And
that gem of the delayed life plan and how that's bunk like completely shifted my thinking. I read that book when I was in Europe, and I was like, how do I create the European experience while I'm building a dental practice? And so essentially I built a practice where there was a vacation in my backyard, because my family has a heart issues. Like, do I even know if I'm going to make it to 65? No, I have less than no guarantee there. So I can build a business and still ski 40 days a year with my son and because this either or work life strain made no sense to me. And that's the thing that really lit me up, is like, I kind of want to have it all, and there's a way to engineer it. It's not easy. It's hard to find, to emulate. It's hard to find mentors, but it's possible if you're persistent. So that kind of like throwing off retirement and just saying like, I'm going to find a path to work and enjoy the rest of my life, I think is a really key mindset for dentists. Otherwise we start running a marathon like a sprint, and then we wonder why we're so burnt out, right?
mm, yeah, so I mean, what are some of the first steps that you would coach somebody through if they are right now working a lot? And I think probably these principles are going to be the same whether you're in dentistry or any healthcare field or any business where you're an entrepreneur, right? There's a lot of
100%.
parallels that
Yeah,
you.
my model, I use dental lingo, but it would work for any busy entrepreneur, because what we're trying to do is make sure our time becomes more and more valuable, so we can't get stuck in the weeds. But it's so easy to bail somebody out or deal with an upset patient when really that shouldn't be your job long term. When you're young and scrappy and you're building a business, yeah, but if that's your default for 30 years, like, no
Mm,
wonder we're not profitable, because you're spending like your time doing $15 an hour things. It just doesn't make sense. So um, a strong meeting rhythm, to me, a strong meeting rhythm means monthly meetings with training with the whole team. It means one-on-one meetings where the owner gets one-on-one time and really gets to know the team member, but also make sure that they're staying aligned with the mission and values. And there's kind of a self-assessment tool that I use there to make it really easy, so that the clinician, who typically hate these meetings because it's like this evaluation and you have to be the judge, juror, and executioner, it takes all the heat off you, and it really becomes a collaborative effort.
How frequently
Department
are
meetings.
those?
So go ahead.
How frequently are the one-on-one meetings?
I do them quarterly, but with a new employee, I would do them monthly, because you have to make sure that they're feeling confident in their job and they're feeling like all of these things that we now know are key to culture. Like, do they feel psychologically safe? Do they feel like their opinion matters? Do they feel like their ideas are taken to heart and implemented? Do they feel like they have some autonomy, mastery, and purpose? So
And do you
that
feel like there's
once
a
you get
max?
rhythm, then I would go to quarterly, because otherwise you're always in meetings. But with a green employee, I would say monthly. With a seasoned employee, I do quarterly.
Do you feel like there's a maximum amount of employees that you can continue to have one-on-one relationships with, or one-on-one meetings with, I should say?
Yeah, it really depends on what your intentions of scaling are. So you may have to delegate some of this to an office manager or a general manager, depending on how big you're getting. But the thing, even in those big organizations, I feel like the team members are begging for FaceTime with the founder, with the owner, because their heart is in that, particularly if they built it, if they founded it, like, that's their heart and soul. And so I make those communications really easy. I call them 10-10. So it's literally 20 minutes.
Hmm.
And you should be spending some of this time with your team anyway. But the reality is that you get wrapped around the axles with patient care and all these other things. So it's really, to me, a high return on energy, even that 20 minutes. I call them 10-10s because I feel like the team member should be speaking at least 10 of the minutes, and the founder, owner, entrepreneur should be speaking 10 minutes. If really, ideally, it's 80-20. If you're asking compelling questions and facilitating the discussion, you're going to get a lot more out of it. If not, you're going to be kind of in this authoritarian role, which tends to not lend well in the long term for employee morale and so forth.
Yeah, I heard a quote, dictators speak, like they dictate, one time, and leaders repeat. And
Yeah.
I thought that was cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So essentially, yeah, one-on-one meetings with your staff once a month when they're new, once a quarter when they've been there for a while. And then any other things that you help, kind of straight away? It sounded like you also said like establishing your core values. Was that something that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, so I have kind of a unique process. The mission never changes in my practice. And I'm actually editing a book called The Mission Driven Dentist. And it spells this out because the key is that we're always trying to get our team to buy into the mission and the vision and the values. For me as the owner, like the mission is mine because I'm never leaving and it's not changing. Like that has to be, you have to be so confident in it that you don't feel like it needs to be edited. So that's a very simple thing where it's just a simple reset. So if you're having an ethical dilemma as a leader, if you're having an issue with the team, it's just a quick compass or alignment tool. But the values, I reset every single year in the annual meeting. And to me, this is a process where we start to align the team members' natural core values with that of the practice. And this is where we find out what they want in a culture by asking them questions like, on the best, we know they come to work for a paycheck, but if we're going to give them something more than a paycheck, on the best day that they have of work, what gets them excited to come to work that day? What gets them fulfilled? What leaves them fulfilled at the end of the day? And you start hearing things like, I want a second family. I spend a lot of time here. So why not have friends and family here that are support? And we start to hear that out in a group forum. Now we start to understand one another at a really heart and soul level. And we can incorporate that into the organization. So it's a fairly elaborate process, but I mean, I always look forward to those meetings because amazing things would come out of it. Like I remember one year, for years, one of the values was integrity, and they kind of like voted it off the island. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I want to speak up here and I want to protest, but why don't I just ask a question? And I said, why did you decide to leave integrity off the list? And they said something super compelling, and it gives me goosebumps as I think about it. They said, we've got that. We need something like that's embedded into us now. We need to do something we need to build something in there to strive for. So this is really the big shift that I think we all have to lean on, is that instead of followers, we need to create fellow leaders, and they need their own zone, and they just start to feel like a CEO, even if that's CEO of the phone call or CEO of appointments, or CEO of in dentistry would be a hygiene op or a doctor's op. Everyone can have their own little territory. And when you give them that level of autonomy, then they treat it like their home as opposed to a renter, which is like, okay, how quickly can I get out of here at the end of the day? And they start to collaborate, and they start to, if it's notorious in dentistry at least, where team members will just kind of tend to their own garden. But if you create this sort of environment, if sterilization is backed up or someone is running behind, you find an office manager run in there and help them turn over the room. So it really helps them see that their zone isn't an island when you have this collaboration at the beginning of the year, and it really sets the sails on where we're headed, knowing that there's a rock solid foundation that is the mission. And then I chart the vision for the year. And then everything else that we do every day moving forward is to make sure that the classic saying is it making the boat go faster? Are we building resistance? Okay, we have to eliminate that, any sort of wasted time in motion. But if there's something that brings something more to the patient experience, that innovates, that adds more value, then how can I say no to that? I'm happy to invest in that as an owner.
Now, do you think that it's ever too early to create like your core values and your mission and vision statement?
This is where I think if you're onboarding an initial team, like if you're a startup, I think you have to have something for them to align to. So I may not start delegating or facilitating at that early point until I know who it's kind of a trust and loyalty check. So I would say early on, like if I'm doing a startup, that's built in. I have a one pager, and I actually use it as an employment tool. If it lights them up, you know that they've been looking for something that's more than just a paycheck. If they kind of roll their eyes and say, okay, what's the benefits package here? You know that they're probably not a long-term person. So that would be the point where I wouldn't take a whole lot of insight from others. But the more you can build a team as your team of trusted advisors, because they're a lot of times your eyes and ears too. They know where patients are consistently getting upset or feeling disappointed, because you, as the owner, at least as a dentist, like I would, a hygienist would say, hey, Mrs. Grove is really upset. And I would go in there and I go, hey, Mrs. Grove. And she's like, hey, doctor, how are you? So they put on a different mask when the owner shows in. They kind of let it all roll when there's somebody who is kind of hopeless and harmless and won't throw up a defense. So you really need that buy-in early. And so I think in those meetings, if you can use that 80-20 rule, that you're only speaking 20% of the time, and a lot of that has to be facilitating questions to pull information out of your wallflowers and your skeptics and those sorts of things. I think that's a really good rule of thumb right away.
That's good. Yeah, that's really good. Okay. So, speaking, it is a real, we'd like to tie things into real estate when we can. Do you think location is important, or I guess really how important do you think the location is?
I think it's intensely important. I'm the byproduct of a poor location. Being in a resort town, I'm on a second floor, commercial properties, commercial condos on the first two levels, and then residential above me. And so, I mean, there's a little bit of signage, but like all of the time we're getting phone calls saying, where are you located again? And they're like, oh, above Bob's. Okay, that's the sports bar that everyone knows, but I have to orient people to that. So if I could have big signage and if I was back in Nebraska, like I would get the premium spot, the premium lot, and know that that's a marketing allocation for me. Because I mean, the dentists that I know that I'm advising that have those sweet locations and they've done all of the homework, they didn't do what I did and say, I want to live here, I'm going to make it work. They said, this is an opportunity because this area is growing, there's lots of new builds, and I'm going to be early to market, and the doctor to patient ratio is really awesome, and the traffic past the location is really awesome. Like if I could do it all over, I don't know that I would not live here, because it's created an incredible lifestyle for me. But if cash flow is your most important pursuit early on, and it should be, premium location, like it, to me, is so key.
Yeah.
it often gets acknowledged or disregarded in acquisitions, because there's this it's a sweet, to an uninformed eye, you look for the greatest facility, the thing that looks good aesthetically, the thing that vibes with you,
Or the best deal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a short-term strategy. So I'm 100% on location. I know that sounds cliche, but damn, like if you're in a busy society when everyone is looking at their phone, you have to figure out a way to get in front of them. And if you don't get in front of them with a physical location, you have to spend tons of money initially to make sure that your marketing is getting in front of them. And that, to me, gets harder and harder as time goes on, either because, again, it's so noisy and they're so distracted. And I mean, I spend $10,000 a month initially in order to get sufficient new patient flow. And if I would have spent that on signage or real estate, I could have had a bigger facility, a better facility. I just didn't know what I didn't know. So hindsight 2020.
Yeah.
I probably could have found a better location. I strictly bought this because it was already plumbed for a dental office. It was a dusty space, but it seemed like an easy move, but it was a really short-term strategy.
Yeah, no, I like everything you're saying is spot on. And it's what we talk about, and it's what we try and coach and preach to our clients as well. Because yeah, you have a tendency, like you saw this building and it already had dental and it looked perfect, and you're going to save so much money up front, and it's like so appealing, and maybe the landlord's working with you, and he's really you're able to negotiate a lot of things, and all that is great, right? And it should be taken into consideration, but it should not outweigh the facts of how that's going to affect your patient flow. Because like you said, real estate and the amount of money you spend is essentially marketing dollars. It's how much are you willing to spend in order to get in front of people? Because if you don't pay that money in rent, then you are going to end up paying that money in advertising.
Yeah,
And
front page ads that don't work, the whole 9 yards. And I'm really candid about that because a lot of my learning was from, like we talked about before, like the School of Hard Knocks, where life threw me up against the wall and said, what are you made of? If I would have made more informed decisions and been maybe even a little less confident, not so overconfident, and I can make this work quickly, then I would have been much further along much sooner. So yeah, like it's just stuff that can't be ignored. You may save in the short run, but you pay for it dearly in the long run. And like in my case, like after a few years of really rapid growth, I felt trapped. So all of those things are key to take in consideration as you build out your long-term vision initially.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that dentists have working against them is just the cost of the build out. And it's very, very expensive, if not the most expensive build out that there is per square foot. So that being said, do you ever coach guys to relocate based on their locations if it's, if it seems like it's not performing?
Absolutely. Like I'm a guy that thinks that if your business isn't growing and rapidly growing, it's dying. And a lot of people, like when I'll speak, they're like, come on, when is enough enough? Like, yeah, I get it, man. Like if you don't want 3 locations or like 8,000 square feet, like I understand it completely. But if you're not evolving and innovating, and if you've put an artificial lid on your growth, that plateau eventually becomes a downward trend, particularly in tough financial times. So absolutely, like anything that I think dentists, practice owners soon realize, or they don't realize, I guess, and they pay the price for it, is that if it's the art of doing less. So if you're not constantly removing barriers and blockades and bottlenecks, and some of that times that's facility, you'll pay for it in the long run. So yeah, there might be a vicious, I'm working with a client that has a flood issue, right? So they can deal with that issue long term, but how often is that going to put them out of business? And if the landlord's not taking care of them, like this is just a broken model, because even if it's okay, like I know from experience, it's an open browser window that you're worried about all of the time as you're trying to get sleep and all of these things. So to get that work and worry off your plate, I think is so fundamental to long-term growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously, if you just move into a location, you spend a lot of money on build out, relocating, breaking your lease is not practical. But at a certain point, it comes time to kind of take the jump, right? And so we really specialize in retailization more specifically, which is just where, hey, we help people relocate from office to retail locations where they're going to see a return based on that rent, because it seems intimidating. Like you can easily go from $3,000 a month in an office space to 10,000 in a retail. And it's like, holy crap, you're thinking in your head, like the multiple, like the percentage effect more so than the hard dollars effect.
Right.
And while it's like 3 times the amount, it's in reality, it's $7,000. Okay. And then if you think about that, is that going to equate to more or less than $7,000 in patients? The answer most of the time is yes, but it's hard to think about it in those terms. And so you just got to go through and do an analysis. So
yeah. And it's, I mean, when you're strapped with like some of these young dentists have residential debt, they have school debt, and it's daunting, but they have to understand cash flow and how that really works, because otherwise if we're seeing everything as a cost, that burden is too heavy. You have to start thinking of everything from CE to adding another op to changing location as an investment, and then as the CEO, make sure that you're maximizing that investment. Otherwise you get wrapped around the axles about, oh, I can't hire this team member, they're too expensive. Like if they do all of the case acceptance, if they do teeing all of that up, and you just have to nod your head, like you can't pay that person enough. So we have to get out of the weeds and seeing everything as a cost, and really see almost everything in a practice is an investment if you look in the right way. And it's your job as a leader to make sure that you're maximizing that investment. And if you're maximizing that investment, there's really no upper limit. So I totally agree with you, Austin. Like that's so key. And it's in a scarce mindset, it's hard pattern to break. But once you break it, it's like you start to live in this land of opportunity where you start to see your license as this golden ticket, and you can take it as a vehicle anywhere you want to go. And then it brings up the second point, like then it can really start to provide you the means that you want, but also the lifestyle where you want, where you can go to Maui for 10 days and not have to wonder what you're going to come back to, an empty schedule, a team that's ready to mutinize you or whatever it is. Like that's true freedom. Yet we weren't typically given the tools to really, the blueprint to really get there.
No, that's good. So to close, I know we talked about books that influenced you, but what would be your book recommendations that you would have for someone who's listening in right now?
I think fundamental for me, and it was a big shift. I told you that that I shifted in undergrad from athletic medicine to dentistry, but what I didn't tell you is that I shifted from overweight, failing, almost on academic probation, lots of beer and lots of late night pizza, to a 4.0 student after I read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Wow.
And I think that's so key because we're always playing this external game. But if we're not seeing an inside out game, like what I do with me is reflected in my business. And there's like a universal law there, is that organizations take on the personality of its leader. And if we expand your capability and capacity as the leader, then the organization follows you. You start to see team members do stuff they've never done before. You start to see paychecks that you've never seen before. So I think that inside out approach is key if you're trying to get kind of boot camp style your entrepreneurial learning. Everything by Jim Collins, read it again and again. And then a steady diet of marketing books, because somebody told me early on when I was trying to feed, I had a pregnant wife and no patients, that the most important day in a business owner's life is when they stop being the doer of the thing and start being the marketer of the thing. So if you can shift your paradigm to, I'm the CMO, I am in charge of marketing dental services, and then on the back end I perform those services, or whatever, whatever the clinician or the technical expertise of a listener is. That's another powerful mind shift, that once the paradigm is shifted, you never go back, because you start to see everything as a marketing opportunity. And if you start seeing everything as a marketing opportunity, then you just have unlimited new patients, because your current patients have such trust and esteem in you and are happy to refer.
That's great. Okay. Well, I will definitely drop those books in the show notes. And so if people liked what they hear and they want to get to know you or get in touch with you after this, what's a great way for them to get in touch with you?
Everything I have is really housed at relentlessdentist.com. You can find me on Instagram, but there's a free training available on relentless.com that really spells out why my coaching model is unique and why an inside-out approach and working on the leader first is so critical if we're going to achieve long-term growth. So I would recommend that they start at relentlessdentist.com, and there's 300 and some podcasts, so lots of really valuable assets available there on that site.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll drop those in the show notes so everybody can get in touch. And hey, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime.
Austin, it's such an honor. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Have a good one.
You as well.